Oh my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
With the second pick in the 2011 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Von Miller, linebacker, Texas A&M.
He's the greatest ever, huh?
And then I just wanted
When you got all the advantages, it's easy.
Welcome to the Aggie War Pod, a product of Dave Campbell's Republic of Football podcast network. I am your co-host, Mike Craven, senior writer at DCTF. The other voice you'll hear on this podcast is a barbecue-eating machine who won't shy away from a road trip or an off-key rendition of Creed. The former fighting Texas Aggie defensive lineman arrived in College Station as a three-star prospect back in 2013. He now resides in Houston, but his heart never left. Ladies, gentlemen, reveille, I present the one, the only, Jay Arnold.
Yeah, and speaking of road trips, it is spring break week for the college kids, which means we're 1 week away from spring practice. But man, I can't help but think about some of those spring break times from college. A little bit of excitement in Gulf Shores, Alabama.
Is that where you were at most spring breaks? Kind of what was your spring break routine usually?
So I did 2 trips to Gulf Shores my freshman and sophomore year. After that, I decided to kind of tone it down, and I went to Phoenix for spring training and to play golf and watch NASCAR.
Nice.
Which was a lot more relaxed, I should say. I got more sleep, and really, Phoenix is a pretty cool town. Lot of stuff to do. If you like golf, like there's so much to do out there, and then the fact that the NASCAR race lined up with spring training just made it even better.
When I was in high school, kind of growing up, I was a baseball player, so I feel like spring break never existed. And then I just looking back on it, I just don't think I ever took advantage of spring break in college, to be honest with you. I don't think I ever did kind of a big thing during that week. But it is spring break. Some of the schools across the state and country started spring practice that week before spring break, and then they take the spring break week and they come back. Some electing to start afterwards. I think we've talked about this last year on the podcast. I find it funny listening to coaches talk about their reasoning for that, because I know some coaches, whether this is real or not, some coaches like to start before spring break just to kind of give their players something to think about going into spring break, whether it be them a little bit sore or thinking about practice, where they don't want it to be kind of like, all right, we're starting spring when you get back from spring break, and they don't want it to be like a last hurrah. They want it to already be going. I think that's really funny, just kind of how different coaches have different expectations on how to do this and how to get through spring practice. Speaking of expectations, that's what we're going to talk about in First Down, just what Mike Elko's expectations are, but also how do you set expectations? What is the fair expectations in a college football program? How do you go about figuring out what is the right expectations for your particular program? With Nick Saban leaving and some other coaching changes going on, I think that would be a cool conversation. Second down, we're going to talk SEC pecking order. Kind of what are the top 5 programs we see kind of finishing off this decade? Where does Alabama sit without Saban? Texas A&M, obviously. Where does Texas and Oklahoma fit in that if they do? Third down, we'll talk a little baseball, a little basketball. Texas A&M baseball team 16-0, so we'll talk a little bit about them. Then March Madness coming up across the country. Will A&M make the tournament? Do they need a run in the SEC tournament to do so? A little bit about that. And then fourth down, obviously, like always, we will go Ask Jay. Before we get going, please rate, subscribe, give us a 5-star, share us on Twitter, tell your friends about it, Facebook. That's how we grow. If you need some apparel, go to homefieldapparel.com, 15% off your first purchase. Jay Arnold with a shirt on right now. Use the promo code WHOOP, W-H-O-O-P. You get 15% off of your first purchase. As I said, we get a little bit of kickback from that. So please go ahead and do that. They put out jerseys, a lot of big stuff for March Madness, obviously for basketball. So it doesn't even have to be A&M gear. You can find all the cool kind of retro gear there. All right, I think they've
got Hendrick Motorsports gear if you're into NASCAR.
Yeah, Hendrick
Motorsports.
Yeah, I mean, for those of us who grew up in the 90s and saw that cool Jeff Gordon stuff with the rainbow stuff back then, that I saw that was back. My little brother was really into that whole thing. What is it? Days of Thunder? What was that movie?
With Days of Thunder with
you freaking love Tom Cruise.
Mm-hmm. Cole Trickle.
Yeah, I'm like 7 years younger,
named
older
after
than
the great Dick Trickle.
I'm like 7 years older than Hunter. I'm probably about the same with you too. I think you two are about the same age, and so we didn't really line up on a lot of our stuff, And I remember having to watch Days of Thunder like once a day, it feels like for a whole year. You know how kids are, where they just can watch the exact same thing. So I feel like I osmosis added the Days of Thunder into my brain. Let's get into this though, Jay. I listen to a lot of college football podcasts. I, obviously pay attention to a lot of the social media chatter. I feel like it's just like part of my job, right? To kind of keep in mind what everybody else is thinking, so I don't get too far into the trees in my own little world, my own little worldview. And when people talk about Texas A&M, they always talk about it as a program that is underachieved, right? That they're in the state of Texas, they're a state school in the state of Texas, they get millions and millions of dollars, they're in a big conference. Why doesn't Texas A&M win more national championships? I think you were a part of a story with Sam Kahn at The Athletic where he talked to a lot of former Aggies and people around the program to answer that exact question. And it leads me to the conversation about Mike Elko, because he is entering his first year as a Texas A&M coach. And as we know, in all sports, maybe in all of life, but definitely in the coaching profession, expectations set kind of what your tenure looks like, right? Like, if the expectation is 7 wins and you go win 9, 10 games, like you are a hero, you get a statue, you get parades. If you're at Alabama and you're Kevin DeBoer, right? Kalen DeBoer, you start winning 8, 9 games, nobody's building you a statue. They're firing you, right? They're talking about how you're overrated. And so I think it's important for fans of their teams, right? Whether it's NFL, college football, whatever you're into, to have a good idea of who you are as a team, as a program, as a franchise. What are realistic expectations, and come up with those before. That way, if a coach is living up to or not living up to set expectations. And so for you, Jay, just to get us going, how do you go about setting expectations? Well, I guess let's start here. What do you think the expectations are for Mike Elko? Not what we think, not what you think, but like, what do you think the average Texas A&M fan believes the expectations are for Mike Elko?
Well, I think it's good to clarify that what our expectations are probably different from the average Texas A&M
because we'll talk about those in a little bit.
Yeah, because I think the average Texas A&M fan expects to compete for titles. I think that's what the expectations are. And maybe they don't expect it in year one. Maybe they do think it's going to be a building process, but that's about as much leeway as they're going to give. And I understand it from a perspective of, like you said, all of the pieces of the puzzle are there, minus the winning. I mean, incredible fan support. The facilities are great. The money coming into the program obviously is there, and you're in a state that produces elite talent. So I understand why those expectations are the way they are. But is it necessarily fair for a coach to have that placed on his plate right away? I don't know. I don't know if that's correct, because I think with any program, it's about setting a foundation and then moving forward. And I think that a lot of times A&M fans kind of skip that setting a foundation part.
Because here's why I'm thinking of this, right? Is because I agree with you. I think the expectations for Mike Elko are to compete for SEC championships, to get into the college football playoff, to recruit at a high level, to do things that, frankly, Texas A&M has never consistently done. And so I think this happens at a lot of places where the floor or the ceiling becomes the floor. You see what's possible, and you start expecting the top end of what is possible. Texas A&M is a program that has won over 10 or more games, one time this century. That was in 2012. I think the time before that's 1998. I think they've only done it 12 times in the history of the program, right? The last conference championship being 1998. So this isn't one of those programs that has that history. So when I hear that those expectations are to compete for conference titles, to beat Texas, to be in the college football playoff, it leads me to go, okay, well then Mike Elko's expectations are to be the greatest coach in the history of Texas A&M football. And is that how to really set expectations? And beyond that, is that how the cycle continues, right? Like, and this isn't just a Texas A&M thing. This happens everywhere. This is why coaches only last 4 or 5 years usually, if they get that. So because the expectations are the ceiling, you expect them to hit that ceiling over and over and over again, if not to explode through them. And when they don't, when they end up being the same type of coach you've had, the last 10 type of coaches that you've had, you go like, oh, this guy sucks, and you fire him. Well, at what point does that become the definition of insanity? I guess would be my follow-up there.
Yeah, and you do have to wonder, like, is it this cycle of just, expecting the ceiling to be basically your average,
Mhm.
right? Like they want the ceiling every year with no process. And I do understand that things have changed a little bit where you can kind of reach that ceiling a little bit earlier with the transfer portal and the amount of turnover in rosters nowadays. But it's just not a feasible way of approaching things to expect you to be at the top of the class every year. Because like even with like an Alabama, right? You have to wonder if it's like a chicken and egg sort of situation where, first of all, we know Nick Saban was an all-time great coach before he got to Alabama. What he did at Michigan State and then LSU, obviously super impressive. So his expectations were probably uh, set highly for a reason. But Alabama also gave him a chance to kind of, like build that consistency. And you can only have so many of those programs that are elite at a time, right? Like there's a critical mass situation where not everybody can be the elite program every year. I think you can have like 3 or 4 of those scattered throughout college football at a given time, and then there's a fall off. Uh, Georgia, I think, is right now going to be the program for the next few years. And who knows what happens from here, right? Like even Clemson, who was so dominant in 2014 to 2018, 2019, whatever it was, they've kind of not been as good recently. And there are people in Clemson that aren't happy with Dabo Swinney, who won multiple national championships in Clemson. So I think it's the nature of the word fanatic, right? Where the expectations just are never going to be reasonable. And we're kind of, talking to a brick wall trying to get fans to have more casual expectations. Part of it too is just like I think there's been a bigger increase on the importance of the national championship for people. Like I think college football, when it used to be a more regional game, you could get away with just beating out your rival and having a decent year. And now, just because of the scope of things, more people want that national championship. And it's just, there's one of them, and there's, it is a very, very hard game to win.
From 1975 to 1998, A&M had 9, 10 or more win seasons. They have 3 in every other year other than that, right? And that's and I think it goes to coaching, right? I don't know if it's so much I think I look at college football through a coaching prism, right? Like it's dominated by coaches. If you put Nick Saban at most places, I think that they become a power, right? I mean, like maybe not Toledo where he, was originally, right? But like I think and if you put him at Texas Tech or something like that, they become a perennial college football playoff team. He gets a lot of talent there. Like I think they changed the equation because if you look at Alabama, that's not. I did this when I did the story about if Sarkisian was going to be an option for Bama. I made the case that Texas is a better job than Alabama, and the reason I say that is because you look at Alabama's history and it's Nick Saban, Bear Bryant. Then Gene Stallings had a few years in there, but it's not a program that just wins every single year, no matter what. It's not a God-given right that you're going to win a lot of football games at Alabama. Dennis Franchione left Alabama for A&M. Like Saban's changed how we think of the Alabama job. And then when you think of the Bear Bryant years and you go like, Alabama's the best program in the nation. Well, it's not, right? Like USC is a better job. Oklahoma historically was a better job. Ohio State, I think Georgia is a better job because of the talent that's in Atlanta and in that state. And so I think Kellen DeBoer is going to have this exact same thing, right? Where it's like, Nick Saban has laid a foundation. Like you can't be the guy who follows that. And that's why so many people didn't want the job because you anything back is you're going backwards and you stink and you could be winning 9. You can go 9-3. And it's like, what's going on with Alabama? And that's just an impossible situation to be in. I feel like the A&M job is a little bit like that, but in the reverse, right? Where it's the lack of success and the hunger for success and the amount of resources put into this program. Because let's also make that point. The Texas A&M history maybe doesn't play as much of a factor into this because the resources at A&M now is different than it was in 1992, right? Like A&M in the 80s, A&M in the 90s, even in the early 2000s weren't positioned to be yearly national champions from a revenue standpoint. They just didn't have the money that Texas and Ohio State and Michigan had. They do now, right? So like, I get why the history doesn't play. It's not like Baylor or something where it's like, well, why? How can you expect that? A&M has grown in to being a monster capable of winning national championships, but you're still asking the new guy to do things that have never been done before. That's a hard existence. And I think it adds a lot of pressure for a coach to win right away, when I think I could make an argument that your first year should be used just to like set up the foundation for later on, even if you just win 4 games, right? Like, I don't care about the wins and losses in year 1. I care about them more in year 3.
Yeah. And that's just kind of the idea of building that foundation, right? Like you need to kind of reorganize things in year 1. You kind of get into a rhythm in year 2, and then year 3 is generally when you should see the results. And again, like those expectations have changed a little bit because of roster turnover. But it's still like the continuity of it. I mean, with just guys being in the program for long, like you still have to have that core group of guys that are used to a system, I think, to really compete. And I think Mike Elko also gets a little bit of added expectations from A&M fans seeing what Sonny Dykes was able to do at TCU in year 1, right? And they think, well, we could definitely do that. We have more resources. We have better talent. Why can't we go for a national title and go play for a national title in year 1? Part of it is the conference setup, and the SEC is a little bit more difficult. No offense to the Big 12, because I think that's going to be a really fun conference to watch this year. But it's just, I don't understand how people can't, to your point, see that A&M has never consistently competed for national titles and just expect every guy that comes in to do that. The money and everything, like you said, like the pieces are there, but until you put it together, there is a little bit of a glass ceiling there. Like you have to break through and prove that you can do it before you can really be in that conversation.
Jimbo goes 45-25, gets paid $86 million to leave, right? Kevin Sumlin, 51-26, gets paid to leave. Mike Sherman, 25-25. Dennis Francione, 32-28. Like, we're asking, like, you better be a lot better than that if you're Mike Elko, right? It's not just like continue on this path, or like, it's like, no, like they're expecting you to be LSU, to be Alabama, to be Georgia. Like, that's what A&M fans are expecting. And it's just new. Like, it's just like, nobody there knows how to do that, right? Like, there's not like old admins that have been around and old, like, like coaches who have been there before, who have done that you can lean on. Like, hey, how'd you tame that beast? How'd you win at Alabama? How'd you win at Ohio State? But you're asking him to do something that, like, he can't call up anybody and like ask what the blueprint. I guess the closest one he can is RC Slocum, who's, the acting athletic director right now. But as you pointed out, winning the Southwest Conference back when this was a regional sport is much different than winning the SEC now. Like, it's just a different game in almost every single way. And that's before we start talking about paying players and roster management with the transfer portal and all the other stuff that Slocum and his contemporaries didn't have to deal with. So I think we agree of what the expectations are, right? Win a whole lot of football games, compete for conference titles, get into the college football playoff, right? Like, compete with the big boys of this sport. What are your expectations for Mike Elko?
Yeah, and I do think that competing and getting into that playoff spot is still one of my expectations, but I want to make it clear that competing for a playoff and competing for the SEC title are not necessarily mutually inclusive. With the new playoff format, you can lose 2 conference games and still be in that playoff conversation, right? You can lose 2 or 3 games as an SEC team and still be able to make the playoff. So I do think that A&M needs to be consistently in that playoff conversation, but I think that's less of a burden than it has been in the past, right? Like, when it was a 14 playoff, you pretty much have to win the SEC title or be in the SEC title game to be in contention for the playoff spot. Now it's a lot less pressure, and I do think you still want to see Elko win an SEC title occasionally. But I think that's like a, once every 5 years type of thing, right? Like, that it's just not feasible unless you really put all the pieces together to win that title consistently. Now, that expectation can always be reset depending on what he does. But I think you build the foundation first of, consistently hanging around 9 wins, 10 wins, and then having 1 or 2 years where you're above that. I actually, the other podcast I host with my buddy Jake, he's a Penn State fan. And we talk about Penn State and Texas A&M being very similar programs
Yep.
in that, they're not at that same level of an Ohio State or a Michigan right now. But all their fans expect them to be. And they've kind of got set in this purgatory where they can't break through that ceiling. And some of the fans are ready to get rid of James Franklin. Some are like, well, this is a really, really good place to be as a program, compared to the rest of the country. And it's A&M is a step below that, I think, but it's a similar concept where you still have to break through that ceiling before you can really expect to do it every year.
In general, expecting to be better than your lot is a hard life, right? Like
Yep.
you're going to be perpetually disappointed. But my expectations for Mike Elko are, I mean, this doesn't make for a great podcast, but it's similar to what you're talking about, right? Like compete for the third spot. We know the SEC is going to get at least 3 teams into the playoff every single year, whether it stays at 12 or goes to 14, whether it's mandated or it's just a happenstance. If you were the third best team in the SEC, you were going to be in the top 12 of the rankings and you're going to get in, right? So for me, compete for that. I think that's a great point about Penn State. I think Penn State, Notre Dame, Texas A&M are amongst the programs that can benefit the most from this expansion because you don't have to go be Georgia. You don't have to go be Alabama. Just be better than Ole Miss. Be better than Mizzou, right? Be better than Florida. Be better than Tennessee. And then you're in, and then you can go do it from there. And if you start getting into that dance, if you're consistently the third team, well, then it's much easier to start punching to first. Right? It's hard to go from 5th to 1st. But if you start consistently being the third team, being the 10 seed, the 9 seed, the 8 seed in the college football playoff, kids start seeing that, recruits start seeing that, the fan base is excited, you get the occasional home playoff game, you win one of those, right? Like all of a sudden, what used to be a disappointment going 10-2, 9-3 and being 8th in the country for Penn State, now all of a sudden that's an awesome season. That was a hell of a lot of fun, right? So the math is changing for A&M at a good time for those expectations to start being. It wasn't very realistic to expect A&M to be the third best team in the country on a yearly basis, right? Like I don't believe so. Other people can have different opinions on that, but that's asking a lot, right? And so to me, with the playoff expanding, it gives A&M an opportunity to start setting expectations that are realistic and reachable. And this is just an outsider's point of view. That seems like a lot more enjoyable lot in college football life. Like I'm a UTSA fan. I went to UTSA, right? And my only hope for UTSA is that they beat North Texas, they beat Texas State, and they compete for conference championships. Like that. And if they do those things, like I'm happy as a clam. Last year they beat Texas State, they beat North Texas, they fell 1 game away from the AAC championship game. That's a hell of a down year. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty cool. And so I guess I see a lot of these big schools, and I'm not envious of being a fan in that fan base because it seems miserable. Like it does not seem very fun for it to have to be best season in program history, or at least right there, or we suck and how we're going to fire this guy like that. That's not fun at all.
And we're not telling you that you have to be happy after a loss because you don't.
No.
But maybe kind of temper the expectations overall a little bit and go from there. Again, it's like you said with UTSA. I mean, it's knowing what your program is and then going from then. Honestly, like you mentioned, being an Alabama fan almost seems miserable at some point.
It's about to be real miserable.
Well, yeah, but it's like half the time they don't even get the environment in there because they're so used to winning. Mm-hmm. They're just so used to winning at this point that it's like, all right, well, the expectations have been distorted so much in one direction that it's hard anytime you lose any game to keep the faith. And obviously, like by nature of sports, you're going to overreact to things no matter where you are. But and I say this as an A&M fan, like that would be a great problem to have. I'd love to be able to say we've won so much that anytime a loss happens, it's a disappointment on a massive scale. But it's just like you said, just focus on winning a few key games, staying above 500. Obviously, you can't have a 5-7 year. Like
No.
that's the one
Right.
thing we
Right.
can agree on. You should be around 9-3
Mm-hmm.
and 8-4, and then go up from there. I mean, even 8-4, I think can be, that's something that you hope to improve beyond that very quickly.
Yeah.
But it's just, man, I wish I could just grab fans as a whole and say, be reasonable people.
Right.
Again,
You
that's
can't.
just
You can't do it.
not a choice you have.
And I can hear people like yelling through their podcast listening choice right now, or even on YouTube or whatever, however you're listening to this podcast. Like I can hear the alpha males in the background going like, this is such loser mentality, right? Like you're supposed to
Yeah.
win every single game, and that's fine. Like if that's how your experience, if you want it to be that, like that's fine. Like
If you're a player on the field, that's what you should be thinking.
right,
But
right.
anybody else, you
Right,
can
when you're in
kind of
section 230,
calm down
like
a
just
little
calm down a little bit. But like I guess my response to that would be like, okay, I'm a Liverpool Premier League fan, and I don't expect Liverpool to beat Manchester City all the time, right? And to win European championships. Like Real Madrid's got more money, Manchester City's got PSG's got more money. But on Sunday, I was mad that Liverpool didn't win that game. Like, I'm not saying don't get upset that your team doesn't win the football game and to have high hopes and to root for the upsets and all that kind of stuff. But like, also come Monday, be able to have that conversation with yourself and go like, okay, well, the sky isn't falling because that thing I hoped for and didn't happen, right? Like there has to be, or you're just constantly going to be in this cycle of new coach coming in underachieving, new coach coming in underachieving. Well, like it's underachieving because of the expectations you've set, right? It's like being a first round draft pick opposed to a fifth round draft pick. Like your careers are defined completely differently, even if you do the exact same thing based on what your expectations were coming into the league. And
to be fair to A&M, they brought in Jimbo Fisher explicitly because he was a national championship coach, with the expectation of winning a national championship. I think hiring Mike Elko is a little bit more of a reasonable approach in what you want to accomplish in College Station.
The splash stuff doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't work. Like there's probably 3 or 4 examples of it working, but I can find 30 or 40 to where it doesn't, right? Like it's just not going to work. That you cannot money whip your way. Culture still matters. Like it just does. And having money on top of that culture is the winning combination, right? But like, give me culture over just dead money all the time. And that's what it felt like for the last 3 or 4 years.
And we didn't even get to like how much really like timing is just a factor in being successful as a program, like having the right pieces at the right time. Because if you're mismatched, then it doesn't matter. Like you have 1 weak unit. And, I mean, there's so many factors that go.
If that 2020 season happens in 2021 or in 2019, like when it's not a COVID season and they do make it to the playoff or whatever, who knows how different that era gets, right? I mean, it's small margins. Like these things flip on a dime. To close this conversation off, how do you think his tenure looks? Like, how do you think the Mike Elko tenure goes at A&M?
Man, it's tough because I mean, obviously the game has changed too with Texas and OU coming into the SEC. I think there's a little bit added pressure in both recruiting and who you have to beat, right? Like A&M fans are going to circle that game at the end of November now. That is going to be something that plays a role and can save or lose your job. I'm struggling to separate my feelings about what I think Mike Elko is as a coach with the historic aspects of A&M, because I think Mike Elko is a fantastic defensive mind, and I think he's going to do really well given a chance. I worry about that chance being given, right? And what we talked about with the unreasonable expectations. Year one's going to be interesting, just because again we have so much roster turnover here for A&M that it's tough to see where pieces are going to fit exactly. But I think you go in and you win 8 games in your first year. I think that's a fantastic base to move forward. From there, my personal expectation is that we'll talk about A&M in that Penn State tier under Mike Elko, where they are consistently competing for that 3rd SEC playoff spot.
And you think he can do that?
I think he can do that. I'm not saying that he'll get it every year, but I think A&M will consistently be in the conversation for that spot.
Yeah. I love the Mike Elko hire. I think, we've talked about this on podcasts. I talk about this on other podcasts all the time. The whole like coaching 180 rule, right? Where you go for the opposite of your last dancing partner. And Mike Elko, to me, is everything A&M needs, plus the familiarity of him already being here and knowing some of the donors and stuff. I think it's a knockout hire. I don't know if the landscape is conducive to reaching the expectations needed to like be a long-term coach at Texas A&M. Like, the SEC didn't get any easier, right?
No.
Like OU's there, Texas is there. Like even with Saban going away, it's not like Alabama's going to fall off of a cliff or whatever. And I have one for you, Jay. Obviously Texas A&M is going to be something I write about like probably 30,000 times before it kicks off. And so I've been reading some books, doing some research, and I found something that I found to be very interesting. Texas has won 10 or more games 24 times. A&M has done it 12 times. You want to guess how many times they've done it in the same year? Once.
That's bad podcasting, but I was holding up a 0 for those that aren't watching.
The answer is once, 1975. When Texas wins 10 games a year, A&M averages 5.62 wins a season. When A&M wins 10 games a year, Texas averages 6.9. They stink when the other is good. Yeah. Like it has historically not been possible for both of them to be good at one time. Texas is pretty good right now.
Yep.
Like they just are. And that is something else. Not only does Mike Elko have to do things at A&M that have never been done at A&M, he also has to do it in the face of a Texas program that is doing well. The timing was from 2012 until last year, right? Like there was a window open and they were recruiting that window, right? Like A&M was putting together the talent to do what I'm talking about doing. They had an opportunity with the SEC money, the platform, the spotlight, the recruiting talent to put Texas in the dirt and to have those 10-win seasons as Texas was stinking. It's going to be even harder now with the SEC as deep as it is, plus Texas rolling. He's got to do something that has never been done at A&M to be seen as a success. I'm rooting for him because I think he's a great dude. I would not put my money on it happening in a way that was palatable by the fan base. If the expectations were what we just spent 20 minutes talking about, I think Mike Elko knocks it out of the park. I don't think those will be the expectations. And I'd imagine by year 4, year 5, he's meeting him, half the time, maybe a third of the time. And that I don't know if that's good enough.
Yeah. And one piece that we didn't even touch on is the uncertainty at the AD position too.
Sure.
Because that can also be a factor in how much leash the coach has, right? Like
it's also a factor into why Texas A&M hasn't achieved as much as we think that they should, is the turning over behind the scenes too, as well.
So that's something that can play a role in expectations as well, because you get a new AD in and they want to immediately make their mark on a program, and maybe Elko has done well but not quite what you want, and all of a sudden there's lack of support behind the scenes. There's just a lot of things that make this such a difficult proposition for Elko going in. But again, like you said, I'm rooting for him. I like who he is as a coach, even taking away who he's coaching for. Like I rooted for him when he was at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a hard-nosed, blue-collar defensive guy that I just kind of want to see succeed. And it seems like his players like playing for him. So I hope he gets a fair shake. Is what I'll say.
Yeah. And anybody who thinks that I'm some kind of hater out there or whatever, I'm telling you guys, my dream is for 11-1 Texas and 11-1 Texas A&M to play big games on Thanksgiving weekend and to get rematches in the college football play. Like I don't know if I can describe my business model any better than saying A&M being good is good for business. Texas being good for like all that stuff, right? Like I hope that's every single year while SMU's winning the ACC. North Texas is winning the AAC. Like I am as Texas centric as you can get.
I'm surprised you went that far. I would think that UTSA winning the AAC.
Well, I was trying to show that I wasn't as big of a homer as like it could be Rice. Like I don't care. Like it just like give me Texas ties. Give me Texas ties playing important football in November and December and now into January. And like I'll keep paying for my house and like I'll be happy as a clam, right? So like this isn't me hating. Like I just know how fans are.
Yeah.
And I'm a history, like I'm just somebody, this is my limitation as a human. I am very much like a history dictates the future, right? Like, and it probably plays into some of my lack of confidence, right? Like if I like, I'm not single anymore. But if I went into a bar expecting to pull something that I've never in my life been able to pull, like that's only to be the opposite of my benefit. Like
Yeah.
that's not going to make my life better. I'm gonna assume I'm gonna pull what I've always pulled, like that. That's just how that goes. And so, like to me, when I look at A&M, that's kind of where I'm at with it, right? Like, do they have the ability to do all the things that the expectations are? Of course, they got all the money, they got the talent, they got all. But like they never have. So we'll see if they do. And if
I
they
think
do, I will be
I
the
think
first
it's
one
an
that's like,
old
yes.
I can't remember who said it originally. Uh, but I think the quote is potential just means you ain't done nothing yet.
Right, right, right.
And that's where A&M is right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Me too. All right, let's go. Let's get into second down, into some SEC pecking order because I think this kind of goes along with what we're talking about. I wanted to set our SEC pecking order to kind of give a little bit more illustration to what I think the expectations can be. Right, like if we go through this pecking order and A&M's not one or not two, well, then you can't have the expectations of them being number one or number two. And so the way I wanted to set this up is like, let's make a top five. Let's make our top five SEC programs in terms of predicted success the rest of the decade. So, like from 2024 through the 2030 season, who do we think is going to be the best team when we look back on the end of this decade? You want to go first and kind of give me your fifth team? Or do you want to
Yeah.
go? Let's go top down. Let's go number
Okay.
one down. Like who is your
I'm,
top team in the SEC?
I
Georgia.
think we're probably going to be unanimous on this. It's
Okay.
Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll just skip through that. Now, hold on. Before we move through that, is that dependent on Kirby Smart being there the whole time, or do you think that like is that more of a Kirby Smart thing than a Georgia thing? Because I think mine is more of a Kirby Smart than
Yeah,
Georgia.
because like you said, look at it through the lens of coaches and what Kirby Smart has done so far, and what he's likely to do if he stays there. I think yeah, Kirby
Yeah.
Smart makes a difference in Georgia being that dominant program for the next
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah. So I have Georgia as well at number one. Who do you have at number two?
Man, it's tough
Mhm.
because there's so much uncertainty with Alabama right now, and Kalen DeBoer coming in, and I think the coaching parable is that you never want to be the guy that follows the guy. You want to be the guy that follows the guy that follows the guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's
DeBoer's in
rule 41 of the laws of power or whatever.
exactly it's a tough position to be in. But with that being said, like there's so much uncertainty elsewhere in the SEC that I think he can come in and be successful right away. With that being said, there's a new team coming into the SEC that just made the playoffs. And as much as it hurts me to say this, I think I got to put Texas in that 2 spot.
You got Texas at the 2 spot.
I do.
Okay. Just remember who had Texas at 2 when you're listening to this podcast and everybody's calling me a hater. Just remember who had Texas at 2 and who didn't have Texas at 2.
Listen, I try to be as unbiased as possible.
I know. I'm trying not to get shit on social media, so I have a little bit different. My number 2 is LSU. And it's simple. If you're a head coach there, you win a national championship. Like that, the last 3 have done it. I think Brian Kelly can pull that off as well. In a bad year, they had the Heisman Trophy winner and 2 of the best wide receivers in the country. Like Louisiana talent may not have the depth as Texas talent, right? They don't have thousands of kids that can go play college football, but I'll put their top 50 head to head with any state's top 50, right? Like Louisiana talent is Louisiana talent. And it controls that state. Texas has to compete with A&M. A&M's got to compete with Texas. They all got to compete with OU in terms of recruiting in the state. Like LSU is pretty much Louisiana.
Yeah.
And so I will put LSU at number 2. I know that they can be a little up and down sometimes, but like just consistently over this next 6 or 7, like if I had to pick a non-Georgia team to win a national championship in the next 6 or 7 years, I think it would be LSU. So I'm going to put LSU at number 2, and then I had Texas at 3. So that was kind of my top 3: Georgia, LSU, Texas.
Yeah, and then I have LSU at 3. So we kind of flip-flop there. But my thought is just that I think Texas has a more secure base right now. I mean, they're both losing a lot of offensive pieces coming into the next season. But I like the depth of the quarterback position more at Texas than I do at LSU.
I got one for you.
All right.
You're a college president or athletic director, and you're about to hire a head coach. Would you hire Brian Kelly or Steve Sarkisian?
That is a tough call.
Because I think that's where, depending on your answer, I think that may be the difference between 2 and 3 in this list for me.
Yeah, I think I go Sark.
Yeah.
I do think I go
I
Sark.
think I still go Brian Kelly
Yeah.
a little bit, just because he's done it at multiple levels at multiple schools over time. And last year's the first time Sark's really done it. But if Sark doesn't get in his own way, like Sark's issue has never been his coaching acumen. It's been his own personal demons. And if those are really behind him, then like maybe the Sark we saw last year is like, that's what it is now. But I'm still going to, if I got to put my money down, I'm still taking Brian Kelly by an inch. So I'm going to take LSU just a little bit over Texas. But it is, I think it's an illustration of how much of this is coach dependent.
Yeah.
Because Alabama's number one on my list if Saban's still there.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
maybe 2.
Maybe 2 just because of Kirby. But again, it's still looking through that coaching lens. Yeah. But yeah, I have LSU at 3. I just think there's a little bit more uncertainty there. And also, like, you've also had the coordinator turnover at LSU has been a little bit higher rate than what you've seen at Texas. I think that's a big part of it as well. For me, at least. Going down the list to number 4, I think I still have Alabama in the top 5, and I'm going to put them in this spot because I think the expectations are going to be outrageous for DeBoer coming in following Saban. But even if he doesn't perform to those expectations, if he comes up just short, that's still extremely, extremely good in the SEC.
I feel like we are about to do a bad thing with Alabama, and that's taught for 6 months about how they can only go down and can only get worse and regress to the mean. And, oh, here we go. Kellen DeBoer is going to get ran out of town in 3 years. You can't replace Nick Saban. All. And then we look up like year 2 and go, oh, shit. Alabama's like really good. They're just like beating teams differently than they used to beat teams, right? Like I still think Alabama is a perennial college football playoff contender. Kellen DeBoer has won everywhere, and as I said earlier, I am probably too much in the history dictates future success stuff, and like the same with Lance Leipold, the same with Chris Klein. Like, dude, if Jeff Traylor, if you win, you can win. Like, you're going to win Pop Warner football games. Like, you put them in 8th grade, they're going to win an 8th grade A or B game. Like, Kellen DeBoer is going to win. He's going to figure it out. Alabama's not going to fall off a cliff. Like, they may not be Nick Saban Alabama because we've never seen that in the history of the sport, but they're going to be a perennial contender who wins 9 or 10 games. It's just going to be funny to see them freak out over that.
Yeah, no, it's just like, man, I like you said, to have won at every level that he's won at, and to also like the immediate turnaround that he had at Washington. Like, that was a below 500 team. He comes in and immediately makes them a Pac-12 title contender. Second year, he goes to the national championship game. I mean, that is pretty incredible stuff.
And he's got more talent in Tuscaloosa right now than he ever had in Washington, even in that semifinal year. Like, even with the departures and stuff, that's still a top 5 talented team in the country, right? Like, he's got dudes there that he couldn't dream of getting to Seattle. So like, Alabama's going to be fine. I'm curious who you have at 5.
So I have 2 schools that I'm looking at and in the 5 spot. And I have to like acknowledge my bias here and say that, like, would I have Texas A&M in this 5 spot if I wasn't a Texas A&M fan? And I don't know if I would. It seems like Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss is pretty steady. It seems like he's going to be there. Part of that being Ole Miss is just like, it's a good fit, I think, like for the level of Kiffinness.
It's like the highest he can get with being Lane Kiffin. Yeah.
And so I think he's going to be there for the next 5 years. Now, my answer is dependent on that, but I have Ole Miss in the 5 spot.
I have A&M, and it's just because they got more money and they got better access to talent, and I think if Mike Elko and Lane Kiffin are equally good coaches, which I think Mike Elko is on that tier of coaches, if they are equally good coaches, I think A&M with the money and the access to just Houston and East Texas and the recruiting, I think A&M, because of those 2 things, gets the tiebreaker against Ole Miss. So our top 5 is pretty similar.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that you said. I want to see Mike Elko do it at Texas A&M.
You got PTSD. I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
It's tough to commit to it. And now I want to be honest. Like, I think Mike Elko absolutely has the potential to be in this to take A&M to this top 5 level. But right now, reasonable expectations, I still have Ole Miss in that 5 spot.
So we have A&M in the 5th or 6th spot, right? Like in that 5th or 6th spot in the SEC. If
So do you have Ole Miss 6 if you just had to extend the list?
If we just continued to go, I think Tennessee would probably be 6 for me.
Okay.
Tennessee, Florida is also right in there. I think Billy Napier has kind of like dented our perception of what Florida can be. But if we're just doing program rankings, I think Tennessee, Ole Miss, A&M, Florida are kind of in that. I think it's tiers, right? Like I'm a tier guy. I think the top tier is Georgia by themselves, and then it's LSU, Texas, Alabama in there, depending on how that goes, and then A&M, Ole Miss, Florida, Tennessee. Maybe Missouri. I don't know. I think Missouri's another coach thing where it's like Drinkwater's kind of bumped them up a tier because of his coaching, but they're not really there. I think the same thing for Arkansas. And so I think tier-wise, A&M's right there. But here's my point. We have Texas A&M at 5th or 6th in the conference in terms of just program prestige and just the ability to win on a year-in, year-out basis. If Mike Elko finishes 5th in the SEC for the next 4 years, he's fired.
Yep.
And like that's
100%.
That's the rub there. We have A&M, we have Texas at 2 or 3, depending on the list. If he finishes 2nd or 3rd in the SEC for the next 4 years, he's still the head coach of Texas. There's some rumblings if he doesn't win a bunch in the playoffs, but like he's still the coach there. Same for Georgia, obviously. Same for LSU if you get 2nd or 3rd in the conference every year. Alabama at 4 is a question. I think DeBoer gets fired, right? If Alabama is perennial a 4. So I think that's kind of why I wanted to do this exercise. Alabama and A&M's expectations are out of whack.
Yep.
Right. For different reasons, but they're out of whack with where we think that they rank in the SEC pecking order. And it's going to be fascinating to see the coaching tenures of these two guys because of that.
How far away are we from a coach getting fired after making the playoffs?
Oh, it'll absolutely happen. If Ryan Day goes to the playoffs this next year, if like they somehow lose to Michigan again and they're 11-1 in the playoffs and they lose in the first round or something like that, Ryan Day's getting fired. Like it's going to happen. Like James Franklin's going to make the playoffs and that's going to be fine and dandy or whatever. If he doesn't win a game or two, like it's going to happen. Like Brian Kelly at LSU, like just making it at a couple places is going to wear thin. It happens in basketball. Texas ran Rick Barnes out of the building, right? All he did was make the tournament. Now he's got a top 5 team in Tennessee. Like you want something different. Like it's not always about like what you think you can reasonably reach. It's the hope of the next guy being the one who like, hits Yahtzee. And that hope is what frankly keeps my job. Like, I get it. Like if it wasn't for that kind of thought process, like people like me wouldn't have a job. Like college football wouldn't be what it is. And so I need people to have that unreasonable hope. I just also need y'all to know that it's unreasonable.
Yeah.
Like that's it. And as a fan of myself of things, I'm that way too. Like I'm not absolving myself from it. But in this conversation, in this conversation, I can be the outside voice in this conversation, right?
It's the old speck in the neighbor's eye when you have a log sticking out of yours. Like we're definitely not reasonable people when it comes to actually being in the moment.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a lot easier to sit here and say that our expectations should be this way when we're making an effort to be reasonable about expectations, right? Like,
we'll fire Mike Elko on this podcast too if he's not finishing the top 3 of the SEC. Like that's just how it's going to go. I just wanted us to have a podcast before it started for us to like have an anchoring point of going like that we took, like we were on it, All right. Well, that was a lot of fun. I really liked the first down conversation, the second down conversation there. It'll be interesting to see what people, if you have other thoughts, please let us know. Like, again, we want this podcast to be something that we can all discuss and have different opinions on. So please tell us how wrong or how right we are when you're listening to this thing. Let's change the pace in third down here. Let's throw a change up out there. Let's talk a little bit of baseball, a little basketball. Texas A&M, as we mentioned early on in the podcast, 16-0 on the diamond. That includes a thrashing of Texas and Austin. I was able to make it down to Dish Falk to watch. I left in the 6th inning, but I watched a lot of it. How excited are you?
Texas fans left early.
Yeah. I didn't leave because I was disappointed. I left because it was getting late and I wanted to beat some of the traffic. Texas A&M 16-0 on the diamond. How excited are you for Aggie baseball?
I mean, listen, baseball is a distant number 2 for me as far as A&M sports. Obviously, football's always going to be king, but really excited to see the progress that A&M has made. They go out and hire, and I'm going to try to be mature about this and not laugh. They hire Max Weiner for the pitching coach, and it seems like it's been a turnaround immediately, right? Like I think the pitching has almost immediately improved. Obviously, Schloss is a great coach. Everything that he did at TCU before he got to A&M,
Yeah, that was a great hire.
It was a massive hire for the Aggies, and 17-0 or 16-0 with a win over your in-state rival. Obviously, like I want to temper my expectations a little bit because SEC baseball play is even worlds harder than SEC football.
Which is an amazing thing to say, but you're right.
Yeah, and again, that's going to get more difficult with Texas and OU coming in too. But as it is now, like I think the SEC is far and away the best baseball conference, and it is incredibly difficult to make it through a season. Like I kind of want A&M to get that first loss out of the way, just so it's over and done with. Because let's be honest, they're not going to make it through the season undefeated.
Right.
That's just not
Yeah.
going to happen. But yeah, it's hard not to be just super pumped up about this A&M team right now and what they have the ability to accomplish throughout the season. But man, like it is hard to advance to Omaha. I think that's what the expectation is right now. I also don't think fans really understand how hard it is to advance from a regional and a super regional in baseball. And it's just that postseason tournament is probably one of the toughest in any sport anywhere.
It's just such a crapshoot because like baseball is such an over the distance sport, right? Like single game stuff just doesn't give you any justice in baseball. And you can play this great season, play 40, 50, 60 games of unbelievable baseball. You got one bad day, you lose a doubleheader and you're at home in the super regional. Like that's just how it goes, right? Pitcher hurts his arm, your ace hurts his arm, and then you're short staffed. You go into a regional and you're on, your sixth, seventh guy by day two, and you're toast, right? Like it can be cruel, but they're a lot of fun to watch. Yeah. They slash the ball, they hit with power, they can run a little bit. The pitching staff, as you mentioned, much improved. Like it's just a good, fun, solid baseball game, just like his TCU teams were. Like that's just what he does. Hell of a baseball coach, a great hire there for the Aggies, and it's already paying off. The SEC baseball tournament is like I think simultaneously it's probably the easiest chance A&M has of winning an SEC championship over the next 3 or 4 years, right? Because like you can get hot and like it can work in your favor as well. Like you don't always have to be the best team every single time, and you can go win the SEC tournament or something like that. Same basketball, I guess, gives you that opportunity as well. Whereas football feels like the one that you got to just like go earn the old-fashioned way. But yeah, SEC baseball season is going to be really good this year. And you're right. The expectations when you start this hot are Omaha or bust. So there's another expectation conversation there for everybody else. Speaking of the other side of the expectation conversation here, the Aggie basketball team. March Madness coming up. The latest projection I've seen has them as one of the last teams out. And so they're going to need a couple of wins in the SEC tournament to really lock up a spot. Who knows? I mean, with the Q1 and all that kind of stuff, who knows what the committee ends up looking at the most and stuff like that. But what are your overall thoughts on A&M basketball? Neither one of us are like monster college basketball fans, but it does feel like for Buzz, it's like, I mean, you got to at least make the tournament, right? I mean, those are the expectations. And if you're not going to get in for the second straight year, there's not much use for you.
Yeah. And, last year they make the tournament, then have that disappointing loss to Penn State. Which would have set up.
It was NIT the year before that.
Yeah, and it would have set up around a 32 clash with Texas, which would have been a lot of fun.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, one and done in the tournament's not good enough, I think, for A&M's expectations, especially if you're not making the tournament every year. I do think that Buzz he needs to make the tournament, and so it's going to depend on that SEC tournament run. Like you said, though, like basketball is one of those sports where it's cliche, but if you get hot at the right time, you can make a run in the late season. And A&M has done it before in the SEC tournament where they get all the way to the championship game after not having the best year in conference. I just think the expectations for this year with how much older talent was on this roster and tenured talent, I just think A&M expected to do a lot better than what they've done this year, and it's just been inconsistent.
I think if they win one game in the SEC tournament, they're most likely in. If they win two, they're in for sure.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a big week ahead for A&M basketball. I need to get to a game. I haven't been to a basketball game. I've seen like everything in College Station. I've been to a A&M baseball game, football game, obviously. I've never been to a basketball game. I need to get out there and go watch that. We've flirted with covering college basketball at Dave Campbell's Texas Football a lot. Like we kind of pseudo do a little bit more at the lower levels. And I've always been hesitant to really jump in there because I'm one of those people that like you either do something all the way or you don't do it at all. Like
Right.
what's the point of like covering something like somewhat or whatever? And then the other part is like I just have never been able to grasp where college basketball is in the fandom of the state. Like how much because I mean, the argument's easy that college basketball in the state is much better than the college football.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Look
last
at U
time,
of H.
yeah, I mean, well, the last time Texas won a national championship in football is 2005, right? And before that, it was 1973 or something. Like hadn't been a lot of college football national success. Well, like 3 or 4 teams have won national championships in basketball. And so TCU's gotten better. Texas, obviously, pretty good at basketball. Houston, as you mentioned, Baylor, like really, really good basketball. North Texas is quietly a good basketball school. Texas Tech, obviously, who just hired North Texas's coach last offseason. So, like, it is big. Like, basketball is really big in the state, but I just don't know where the fan fervor of it is, right? Like, going to a game, fine. Will you read about it on Tuesday, right? Because, like, football, you'll read about it on Tuesday. You'll read about it on a Tuesday in April. Like, you don't give a shit, right? Like, people care about football in the state. They will read about it anytime. But, like, basketball, baseball, that's not the same. And it's why you see the coverage the way that it is, despite how good the state is at basketball, right?
Yeah. It's harder to gauge that fandom. But, speaking of other sports that you want to cover, I mean, how about Brazil and Mexico playing at Kyle Field?
Dude, I leave for Europe on my honeymoon the next day on June 9th. I am trying to find somebody who will pay me $100 in gas to go cover it on June 8th because I will write that story. And it won't be much about soccer. It'll be what's happening in Aggie Park. That is going to be fascinating.
I also love the hypothetical possibility of A&M hosting a super regional in baseball that same weekend.
Oh my God. I have to be in that town on that day. I don't need a ticket to any of the games. I just want to walk around and watch the intermingling of all of those fan bases together. Brazil, Mexico, A&M baseball, like injected into my veins. Like that would be absolutely incredible.
The Gonzo's perfect preview of the World Cup.
Oh my God. Like I'm going to like Hunter S. Thompson that story. If somebody will let me just like go do that story with not as many drugs, but
well, listen, we can just put it on the slant that like if A&M's hosting a baseball super regional, I mean, that's pretty easy to talk that up. And then if you so happen to make your way over to the Kyle Field side of campus and interact with Brazil and Mexico fans I'm
gonna shout out. I'm gonna reach out to the Houston Chronicle, be like, hey, I would like to write for y'all for the World Cup when it comes in 2026. Let me have a free trial here. Just pay for my gas, and like I'll go write you 1,000 words on Mexico, Brazil, Kyle Field. Like please give me that opportunity to write that story. I would love that. I'm going now. I've already talked myself into like in this conversation, even if nobody pays me. I'm probably just going for my own bemusement. Let's move down to fourth down after I just butchered that word into the Ask Jay segment of the show. First off, Mark Roberts, avid listener, one of my favorite people on Twitter. Actually met him before in real life in San Antonio. Good dude. Also cares about the Roadrunners that I am a big fan of, obviously. His question is, who wins the Premier League? Last week on this show, we talked about the epic Liverpool-Manchester City game that was happening Sunday, March 10th. I hope a lot of you tuned in. Maybe if you didn't have much else going on. It was a great game. Liverpool should have won, probably. We had more chances in the second half. But a great game. Tied 1-1. Arsenal at top of the league because of goal differential. 1 point separates Manchester City, Arsenal, and Liverpool. Jay, who do you have winning the Premier League, and why is it Manchester City?
The depth that Manchester City have. I mean, it's just how much like Manchester City can suffer injuries and still have an incredibly elite starting group out there. Whereas if Liverpool and Arsenal have a few key injuries, like they're in real trouble.
Yeah. Liverpool was starting guys with 84 and 76 numbers and stuff. You know what I mean? Like we have 77 as our backup striker, we do not have that kind of depth.
It's like having like a 50 or 60 number in basketball where it's just like, yeah, this guy probably doesn't see the court that much.
Spring training numbers.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's just, again, from top to bottom, that Man City roster is just obscene with what they have. Holland is like, again, if you don't watch soccer, it's hard to describe how much of an athletic freak Holland is. Like he's just, I don't even know how to describe some of the things that he does. And like I think he'd be able, if he put a couple of years into it, to come in and play like wide receiver, and then like just with the amount of speed and I mean, he's jumping at like his header, his body control in the air.
Yeah.
So much about them, but like that's just one small piece. You also have maybe the best midfielder in the game and right now and Kevin De Bruyne. And then a great defense as well. So like Man City has everything that you need. And the
best coach in the world.
Yeah. Pep's also there. So I just think that top to bottom, there's more pieces in Man City and more depth that will take them to another Premier League title, sadly.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating that Liverpool is this close to them given the injury stuff. I mean, on Sunday, there was 4 21 and under starters that should be on the 21U team, right? Like we had we had a center back that is 20 years old playing against Holland. You know what I mean? Like Virgil van Dijk, by the way, just a clinic on Sunday. Yeah. Erling Haaland didn't do crap, and that was because Virgil van Dijk is incredible. He was switching. You know how cornerbacks, they'll follow. Like they were. I've never really seen it, honestly, where center backs were like switching sides of the field.
Marking. Yeah,
right. It was pretty fascinating to watch the Pep Klopp, maybe for the last time, battle, at least in this version. Klopp has said, I mean, Klopp's going to coach again. He's going to take a year off. He's going to coach again. I don't think it'll be in England, though. No. He said that he doesn't want to coach another Premier League team. And so it'll be interesting to see if we ever get that one again. Maybe it'll be when they're both national coaches. Maybe Klopp comes and coaches America or something. That is my big dream, by the way, Jay Arnold, that Klopp's out for a year. He loves America. Like Klopp, he's German, right? That's like the sister country. He loves America, and like the idea of like talking him into just like chilling in New York for a couple of years and coaching the American team fascinates me. He would be great. His style of play would work. Like Pep couldn't coach in America. Like we're not good enough technically to play that style. Like Klopp's like just like rock and roll football would work with American athleticism. So that would be a fascinating one to me. At Dave Campbell's TexasFootball.com this week, my colleague Carter Yates is writing a biggest question facing each P4 team type piece. We'll also do one for the G5. He's doing one for the P4 that I think comes out today or tomorrow. We're recording this on Tuesday. So I wanted to ask you, Jay, what is your biggest question facing A&M this spring?
Yeah, it's hard because when you have obviously the amount of roster turnover and the new coaching staff coming in, there's a ton of questions. I think you don't know exactly what to expect. My personal thing that I'm most intrigued to see, and that's where I'm going to go with this question. What does the A&M offense look like under Colin Klein? That's what I'm probably most interested in seeing out of spring ball.
Yep. Me too. We need to stop agreeing so much. We got to figure out a way to disagree. But yeah, that's mine as well. It's just like, I mean, I know what the defense is going to look like. I saw it at A&M for a couple of years, right? Like I'm curious what the secondary pieces are, who emerges as the starters at corner and stuff like that. But I don't know if we're going to even get that answer in spring. We may figure out who's playing the best and who adjusts the quickest and stuff. But I don't know how many starting spots we're going to know about. And starting spots are probably a little bit overrated in the grand scheme of things, except for maybe the quarterback position and like left tackle or something, right? Yeah. So a lot of guys are going to play. I don't know if we get a ton of that, but I do want to see what it looks like. Like I just do want to see kind of what the offense is looking like in the scrimmages and in the spring game. Next, start, sit, bench. This kind of goes with our third down conversation with basketball and baseball. Start, sit, bench, Jay. College football championship game, College World Series, Final Four.
Oh, so this is a hard one, and
I'm pretty good at
maybe
asking
it's
questions.
maybe it's because I'm desensitized to college football because of how much I've watched it.
I
Uh,
love where you're about to go here.
and maybe it's because of the fact that the best college football games to me don't tend to be the national title game. But I think like what are my options here? Start, sit, bench.
Yep, start, sit, bench. Or
Okay.
what is it? What is it? No,
Uh,
start, sit, cut.
Start, sit, cut. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
cutting the college football national championship.
Wow.
I am. Just because I think there's more excitement in the College World Series and the Final Four both. And I'm not even a big of a college basketball fan, but I tune in to March Madness every year. I just think there's so many exciting moments. And basketball, by the nature of the sport too, I think it just produces those like last second thrillers.
Mhm.
So with that being said, I'm going to start the Final Four and I'm going to sit the College World Series just because baseball, I think baseball has a tendency to go one extreme or the other. And I just think that when you get to the Final Four, those games just tend to be so good.
Yeah.
So starting the Final Four, sitting the College World Series, and I'm cutting the College Football National Championship.
I really thought I was going to hot take us here by cutting the college football championship game, but for everything you explained, that is why I'm cutting it, right? It's the reason I'm not a big fan of the expanded playoff and stuff. Like the college football regular season is my event, right?
Yeah.
That is the best part of college football season. Like I hope it doesn't become basketball season where we don't have to care until March unless you're a hardcore. Like the college every Saturday is important. The championship game is usually an afterthought. I'm not a big power on power guy, right? Like next year, for example, this is one that I think the fans will love. Next year in week 2, Texas plays at Michigan. On that same week, Texas State hosts UTSA. I am hoping that my bosses tell me that it is too expensive to go to that Michigan game so I can find a way to get to the UTSA Texas State game. To me, that's far more fascinating, right? Just like such more of a fascinating football game than me. So I am not I could keep the Alabama Michigan stuff. Like I just don't. Most of the time, like you said, it's not a very good game. We know who the best team is. Georgia's going to kill somebody or something. And so I will cut that. I am starting the College World Series though. It is I was able to go to the Masters. I hope that I get to go to a World Cup when it's here, when there's like 17 games combined in Houston or Dallas. I'll be able to get to one of those. I think the College World Series is maybe atop my sports bucket list, at least in this country. I'd like to go see Real Madrid versus Barcelona or stuff. Like there's some things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some stuff, I'd like to go to the running of the Bulls and, stuff like that. Right. But like in this country, I think Army, Navy football, I want to go to one of those, and College World Series is kind of the top of my sports bucket list. I just was never able to cover a College World Series. I think that would be really cool. I'm going to sit the Final Four and then cut the championship game. So I am surprised. 2 football guys. Like I would describe us both as football dudes. And we are cutting the college football championship game, which is why I don't think the playoff needed to expand it, right? Because that's not why we're in this thing.
Well, it's like you said, it's the regular season Saturdays that make the season for us. Like I want to see games like Coastal Carolina and Appalachian State. I want to see Holy War with Utah, BYU. I want to see those games, those regional rivalries. That just like now I will say
Texas versus Texas State or UTSA versus Texas State.
Home playoff games could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, those are going to be awesome.
Watching the FCS playoff with like Montana and some of the games that they played this year. Those games were incredible. So
I hope they move to 2 rounds being home games at some point. Just not even because it's a lot of fun, but because it also takes some burden off of the fans to travel. Yeah. Like, you could travel 3 or 4 straight weeks if your team had like a Cinderella run. That's going to be almost impossible. So we'll see how that goes. But they're going to have to figure out a way to like include the bowls too, since they're ruining those with this thing. So it's just they've created this whole mess, right? Like it's like that meme, like where you shoot somebody and it's like, who did that? That's
the Eric Andre.
Yeah, that's college sports in a nutshell right there. Lastly, before we get out of here, wanted to ask best potential road trip of the 2024 season. For those who don't know, Jay Arnold is a road trip extraordinaire, aficionado. I don't know the exact word for it, but you love a good road trip. I thought I loved a good road trip, and then I met Jay and realized that I'm not maybe as big of a road trip guy as I thought I was. But this isn't a crazy A&M football season. That's why expectations are probably through the roof for Mike Elko. To go back on everything we just talked about, I'm expecting a 9-win season from Mike Elko off the gates because he only has to leave College Station for 4 true road games. Arkansas, neutral site there in Arlington for the last time. But you got Florida, Mississippi State, South Carolina, and Auburn. Those are the only real road trips possible for A&M in the 2024 season. If you had to pick one, Jay, where are you going and why?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I'm getting rid of Mississippi State for the Cowbells.
That's right.
I respect college football tradition, but having gotten my bell rung in a game at Davis Wade Stadium and then actually hearing the ringing of the bells,
man, that's brutal.
It's scarring.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to take that one out of consideration. South Carolina, I just feel like is not going to be very good next year. I feel like that's going to be kind of a letdown game where that atmosphere, Willie B can be great if they're good. But when the Gamecocks are down, it's not as fun to go to that stadium. So I'm narrowing it down to Florida and Auburn. I think those are both fun places to watch a game. I think I go with Auburn on this one. I just think Jordan Hare, it's smaller than the Swamp, but I think Auburn's going to be a little bit better next year. And that's a game that I haven't seen games at either of these places. I say that I was on the sideline for Auburn in 2014, which was awesome. But there's so many parts about Auburn that I just really like. I think it's a very similar school to A&M in a lot of ways, kind of a culty ag school.
Yeah.
And it's just, I would like Auburn more for a road trip, just because I think they're a little more welcoming too. That's maybe an underrated piece of this. Like if you're going as a visiting fan, I think Auburn's more welcoming than Florida. Just from what I've heard. Again, like I can't speak to it completely because I haven't done it myself. But from what I've heard, Auburn is a much more welcoming place than Florida is.
I can imagine that's true just from the stereotype of Florida in general. I have been to both cities. I have not been to a football game at either, but I've randomly been to both. Auburn's better than Gainesville, so give me Auburn. It's a shorter road trip too. If both places are equal, I'll take the shorter one. But I think Auburn's a beautiful campus. If you're into campuses, like Auburn is an incredible campus. And I just think the city's a little bit cooler than Gainesville. They have
a Buc-ee's.
I'm not a big Florida guy, especially Gainesville, right? Like if we're going to Miami or somewhere like, okay, but like I don't need to be in Gainesville, Florida.
Even Tampa. I mean, you get some good Cuban food in Tampa too.
Yeah, more strip clubs per capita than any other place in the country. Tampa Bay for your little bit of trivia there.
Clearwater is the home of the original Hooters and the Church of Scientology. I think I say this fact often, but
I wonder if there's a correlation there. There's a reason that they both.
I have theories. I haven't completely put it together yet.
Right. That'll be our next podcast. Look forward to that one coming. It'll be our last podcast as well. So we'll whenever we want this to be done, we'll do that episode the week. That's when this show is coming to an end. Is when you get the Hooters Scientology crossover podcast and our theories on why that may have happened. So, all right, Jay, that was a beautiful mid-March episode of the Aggie War Pod. Spring practice starts on Monday for the Aggies, and so we will be back next week to talk about the comings and goings of the first week. Probably won't be a ton happening, right? But we'll know some players who are not available.
Roster.
Yeah, we'll have a roster. We'll know who's not available this spring and what that means and stuff like that. We'll talk about who really needs a good spring. I know it's probably everybody, but we can talk kind of more about that kind of stuff. So we're excited to be back. We'll roll weekly through the spring game and then kind of regroup and figure out what we're going to do from there. As I said before, please rate 5 stars, subscribe, pass along, tell a friend, share. Get your questions in for the Ask Jay segment next week, and we will talk to you on the following week. For Dave Campbell's Texas Football, for Jay Arnold, Republican Football, Mike Craven. Peace.